Welcome to your practice at Studio B. We are in the final 3 weeks, believe it or not, of this 12-week journey through Introduction to Yin Yoga. And today's poses and practice are all focused on the posterior chain, which is really the part of the body that goes from the back of the head all the way to the soles of your feet. If you think about the poses that we've done up to this point, a lot of them have been oriented forward, folding forward or working with the front part of the body. And so what that means, because so many of the postures are naturally oriented that way, is it requires a level of intentionality to do practices that really nurture the back body, because we can forget about it. The other thing is when you think about habitually what you do in the day, most of what we do as humans, we do out here in front of us. Washing dishes, folding clothes, picking things up, typing, driving. It's all out in front of us. Even when we sit, we're moving the body in front of us. So again, we create habitual patterns of movement in the body that are oriented forwards. And then the last thing I'll say is, think about older people in your life. Maybe it's your grandparents. Maybe it's just people you've seen in your community. What happens when they get older? They end up being like this, right? Their spines are rounded. They have this totally sunken posture. They often end up thinking they're getting shorter when they're not really getting shorter. They're just folding forward. So all the poses today are going to focus on opening and even stretching that whole back posterior chain. And we are going to start from an all fours position to come into the first pose, which is the toe stretch. So if you're in an all fours position, you can go ahead and tuck the toes, and we want to try and get even that little pinky toe tucked under and start to melt the hips back to the heels. Now for some people, this is already really intense, particularly if you have any arthritic tendencies or plantar fasciitis. So you can even just lower to the forearms and just kind of stay in this huddled position, grounded into the floor. If you feel like you have the space to explore coming upright, even bringing the shoulders, as I just did, over the hips, which brings the whole weight of the torso over the feet, you can work with that. Hands can just kind of rest on the thighs, and we try to soften the face. This is graciously a shorter hold in the yin practice. So we are typically only here about 1.5 minutes. And so we'll have about 1 more minute in this toe stretch pose. And I often find as I'm marinating in the pose, my glutes can start to contract, my thighs can start to engage. It's almost like my body's trying to save me from this sensation here. And when you notice that gripping coming in, that might be a sign to actually soften the shape by bringing the hands forward, knowing that you may have reached your edge. 20 seconds. One more big breath in. And then as you exhale, again, returning to the all fours, walking the hands forward, and we'll take a really mindful counter movement here by just lifting the feet, and for a moment, do nothing. Just let the blood go back to the toes. And then start to squeeze the toes tightly, like as if you were trying to pick something up off the floor with your toes. There's a little achiness there. And then spread the toes apart from each other. Do that one more time. Squeeze tightly. And spread apart. And then we'll sit down, and we're actually going to need our props to come in for the second pose. Now, I will say this is not a super traditional yin pose, but it was taught to me several years ago, and I've really brought it into my own standard canon. So with the blocks, I use 2 blocks for this. One is at the highest height, and then one I put at the medium height near the back of your space. You can also just put your pillow or a stack of 2 pillows, and we create a little ramp here, okay? And so we've got that going on. Let's see if I can get myself, there we go. And then I am going to come forward. This one's a slightly odd entry. The knees come right in front of the bolster, so I start with my shins and my feet on the bolster, and then I lay myself down. So I'm starting with this really subtle back bend. I'm just keeping my head elevated to talk to you, so you can let your head come down. And there's just the shins and the feet elevated. And we spend the first minute or so right here letting the thighs, the pelvis, and the lower belly sort of puddle on the surface of the mat. And maybe just reminding the body, particularly around the buttocks and the backs of the thighs, that its job is to soften here. No clenching, no tightening, a sense of releasing. This is feeling really nourishing, like maybe the body is just really grateful to be here. Know that it's an option to stay here. If you wanted to inquire about deepening this shape, we're going to lift back up onto the forearms. And again, a slightly nuanced transition. I sort of slide one foot up the bolster, and then the second leg comes to meet it so that my knees and the bottom portions of my thighs come onto that bolster, and then I settle back down. And I just let my head come into a restful position. So we took and we amplified the back bend in the low back. And noticing where you're feeling the weight of the body settle. So you may really feel a tiny bit of compression, not in a bad way, just a sense of closing or slight pressure around the low back and buttocks area. And all around that tightening, closing sensation, see if you can soften the muscles around that. So that even though the skeleton itself is closing on the back body, the muscles have a quality of allowing. You might even envision in these last couple of minutes here, the legs like a slide, and allowing the breath to slide down the back of the legs into the whirlpool of the pelvis and lower abdomen. So that the pelvis and the lower belly
become a sort of repository, a sort of container where the breath lands and circulates. Last few breaths here. And then as we prepare to exit, I often like to take one leg and just let it fall off the prop to the side. And then the other leg does the same. So the legs are almost in a shallow V here. And take a few breaths, just belly down, resting. Maybe even swaying the pelvis a little bit from side to side if that feels necessary. And then as you feel ready to transition, bringing the palms underneath your shoulders to press up to all fours. And then we'll guide ourselves into a position where we can shift our prop situation. So we're going to need one block and our pillow or bolster. And we're going to be on our back, so I'm going to put my other block out of the way. And your pillow is actually going to be overhead. So wherever your head is going to be, have your pillow or bolster overhead. And then have the one block you are going to use just within hand's reach, so just nearby. And then come to lie on the back. And you can bend the knees when you get there, because we'll start in a version of supported bridge pose. So arriving onto the back, we've been belly down for this first part of the practice. So give yourself a breath or two just to orient being on your back. And then as you feel ready to shift into that supported bridge, locate the block. You'll lift the pelvis by pushing into the feet and slide the block just to the lowest height. It doesn't have to be super high. Right underneath the sacrum. The sacrum is that sort of flat, bony landing place at the base of the spine, also known as the coccyx. And then letting the tailbone, the base of the spine, just land right there. And if you're wondering what to do with the arms, there are actually a number of really valid options. You could have the hands on the belly. You could have the arms resting alongside you. Or for deepening or more access to the breath, you could bring the arms overhead. And just as we had the slide of the legs in the previous pose, we now have moved the body into a ramp or slide-like position face up. And again, that sensation of the breath pooling in the pelvis and the base of the abdomen. Allowing the breath to come in and out of the heart of the belly. And letting the belly move really freely with the rhythm of the breath. take for about a minute a position we call waterfall, keeping the pelvis on the block. Begin to extend one and then the other until both legs are reaching up towards the ceiling, again like that waterfall. And we're not trying to activate the legs here, so the knees can stay slightly bent, the feet totally effortlessly suspended overhead. And really embodying that imagery of the waterfall with the breath, the lymph, even circulation itself sort of dropping down the legs and pooling in the belly and the torso. This sort of physical embodiment of decompressing. And as you exhale, let the knees begin to soften down towards the chest, releasing one foot at a time back to the mat. So I'm going to pause here and say that if you experiment with the next pose and it doesn't feel good, you could always come back to this supported bridge or waterfall. So know that these are available to you. We're going to introduce Snail Pose, which is a very classic yin pose, really great for the spine and the muscles that run vertically along the spine. So pushing into the feet will remove the block gently and let the tailbone come back to the mat. You can just move that block out of the way, but maybe keep it available if you choose to return to that bridge pose. And then for snail, we're going to draw the knees in towards the chest. And remembering you have this pillow or bolster overhead, which is actually where we're going to go with the feet and the shins. So you gain a little bit of momentum in the legs. We're going to embody the shape of the snail as you swing the legs up and over to land on the pillow or bolster. And much like a snail in its shell, we round the spine, letting the arms release to the floor. It's really not advised to talk or move the head in this position. So as we stay here for about 1.5 minutes, I'm just going to give you the gift of silence. Final 3 breaths. And then to come out being slow and mindful in your descent. And as the pelvis lands, taking a couple breaths in that waterfall position with the legs overhead, just really letting the spine get back acclimated to being grounded. And just to recalibrate the spine, we'll take a brief moment in resting pose, bending the knees, bringing the feet to the mat and widening them the width of your mat as the inner knees come together and you find that resting position. Knowing that when we get into these deeper stretching positions, it can take the body some time to transition out of the pose. So really honoring that time of transition. And then we'll begin to shift into our final resting pose. And I'm going to give you the option today of taking your Shavasana on your back, traditionally, or if you prefer to flip onto the belly and have the spine facing up, so you're down on the belly, either one. But getting yourself so comfortable that the body feels like it could go to sleep, even though we keep the mind awake and alert. Allowing this practice of yin yoga to remind us that we don't always have to push or strive or strain for more. That there is incredible value in just allowing, welcoming, approaching whatever is here from a place of sufficiency. Allowing your next couple of breaths to become a bit more vibrant and energized. And as that breath wakes up, wiggling fingers and toes. And then in your own way and time, guiding the body back upright. Finding a comfortable seat and giving ourselves just a minute before we formally close the practice to do a brief check-in. Noticing first how the body, particularly the back of the body, is feeling after about a half an hour of really focused work. And then maybe shifting your awareness to the state of the mind and noticing the quality of the thoughts in the mind right now. And finally, checking in with the heart, the emotional tone of the moment. And using this check-in as information that helps to inform the way you transition into the rest of your day. To know what is most needed for your system after you've checked in. And then we'll close the practice either by bringing the hands to the body in a gesture of gratitude,
or the palms of the hands coming together, whatever feels more natural to you. Om Shanti, Shanti, Shanti. Om Peace, Peace, Peace.